where it made sense, but we will be able to make a very substantial dividend to the people of our country. I believe we can do that without Congress.
The president commands the military and runs the executive branch. But there's another power in Washington that can override presidential vetoes, reject presidential nominees, control the budget, and even remove a president from office. That power is Congress. Today, we're examining exactly how Congress checks presidential authority, why the founders designed the system this way, and how these checks actually work in practice. By the end of this video, you'll understand the constitutional balance of power better than most political science students. Let's break it down. In 1787, the Constitutional Convention faced a critical question. How do you create an executive strong enough to govern effectively, but not so strong it becomes tyrannical? The founders had just fought a war against King George III, so they understood the dangers of concentrated power. But they'd also experienced the opposite problem under the Articles of Confederation, where the national government was so weak it couldn't function. Congress existed, but there was no separate executive branch. The result was chaos, states acting independently, no unified foreign policy, economic disorder. So the founders created something new: separation of powers. James Madison explained it in Federalist No. 51. He wrote that the way to prevent any branch from becoming too powerful is to give each branch the means and the motive to resist encroachment by the others. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition, he wrote. This wasn't just theory. The Constitution gives Congress specific tools, what we call checks, to limit presidential power. These checks fall into 5 main categories: legislative power, confirmation power, budgetary power, oversight power, and the ultimate check, impeachment and removal. Let's examine each one. Check 1. Legislative power. This is the most fundamental check because Congress makes the laws and the president can only execute them. Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution states clearly, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. What does this mean in practice? The president cannot create laws. The president can propose legislation, can advocate for policies, can even draft bills that members of Congress introduce, but only Congress can pass laws. The president must work within the legal framework Congress creates. But here's where it gets interesting. Congress has a powerful tool if the president vetoes legislation they've passed, the veto override. If 2/3 of both the House and Senate vote to override, the bill becomes law despite presidential opposition. This is a high bar, 67 senators and 290 House members, which means it requires significant bipartisan support. But it happens. Since 1789, Congress has successfully overridden about 110 presidential vetoes out of more than 2,500 vetoes cast. That's roughly 4%, which might not sound like much, but it represents Congress asserting its constitutional authority when majorities in both chambers strongly believe the president is wrong. A recent example, in 2021, Congress overrode President Trump's veto of the National Defense Authorization Act. This wasn't a partisan vote. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan majorities because Congress believed the legislation was necessary regardless of presidential preferences. This check ensures that even a popular president cannot simply ignore Congress. The legislative branch remains supreme in lawmaking. Check 2. Confirmation power. The president nominates, but the Senate must confirm. This applies to cabinet secretaries, federal judges, Supreme Court justices, ambassadors, and hundreds of other positions. Article 2, Section 2 gives the president power to nominate these officials, but only by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. That phrase, advice and consent, is crucial. It means the Senate has real power to reject nominees. And they use it. Throughout American history, the Senate has rejected numerous presidential nominees. Supreme Court nominees have been rejected 12 times. Cabinet nominees have been rejected 9 times. Hundreds of lower-level nominees have been withdrawn after facing Senate opposition. The confirmation process serves multiple purposes. First, it vets nominees for competence and character. Senate committees hold hearings, ask questions, review backgrounds. This scrutiny can reveal problems the president's team missed or ignored. Second, confirmation gives the minority party some influence over the executive branch. Even if they can't block nominees unilaterally, they can ask tough questions, demand commitments, and extract concessions. Nominees often promise to consult with Congress, to respect certain precedents, or to maintain independence from the White House. Supreme Court confirmations are especially significant because justices serve for life. Once confirmed, they're independent of both the president who nominated them and the Senate that confirmed them. This means the Senate takes these confirmations very seriously, knowing they're shaping the judiciary for decades. Recent examples show this check in action. In 2016, the Senate refused to consider President Obama's Supreme Court nominee, Merrick Garland. Whether you agree with that decision or not, it demonstrates the Senate's constitutional power to influence the judiciary through its confirmation authority. Check 3. The power of the purse. This might be Congress's most powerful check. Article 1, Section 9 states, "No money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law." What this means is simple but profound. The president cannot spend money unless Congress authorizes it. Every dollar the federal government spends must be appropriated by Congress through legislation. The president proposes a budget, but Congress actually controls the checkbook. This creates enormous leverage. Want to build a border wall? Need Congress's appropriation. Want to fund a military operation? Need Congress's appropriation. Want to implement a new program? Need Congress's appropriation. The president can have grand plans, but without funding from Congress, those plans remain just plans. Congress can also use appropriations to restrict presidential action. They can pass laws that prohibit spending on certain activities. For example, Congress has used appropriation riders to restrict military deployments, prevent closure of military bases, or prohibit funding for specific policies the president supports. The annual budget process forces negotiation between Congress and the president. Even when the president's party controls Congress, individual members can leverage appropriations to extract concessions, demand policy changes, or protect their district's interests. Government shutdowns illustrate this dynamic. When Congress and the president can't agree on appropriations, parts of the government shut down because there's no legal authority to spend money. This happened in 2018 to 2019 over border wall funding, a clear example of congressional power to check presidential priorities through budget control. Check 4. Oversight and investigation. Congress has broad authority to investigate the executive branch, demand documents, compel testimony, and expose wrongdoing. This power isn't explicitly stated in the Constitution, but the Supreme Court has recognized it as implied from Congress's legislative responsibilities. The court reasoned that Congress cannot legislate effectively without the power to investigate and gather information. Congress's oversight takes many forms. Committees hold hearings where executive branch officials must testify under oath. Congress can issue subpoenas for documents and testimony. They can conduct investigations that last months or years, employing staff investigators and legal counsel. The January 6th committee provides a recent example. The House established a special committee to investigate the January 6, 2021 events. This committee issued subpoenas, compelled testimony from White House officials and others, obtained documents, and held public hearings. The president couldn't just block this investigation, though executive privilege claims did delay some testimony. Oversight serves multiple purposes. First, it exposes problems. Congressional investigations have revealed misconduct, waste, fraud, and policy failures throughout American history. From Watergate to Infra-Contra to more recent scandals, congressional investigations bring facts to light. Second, oversight creates accountability. When officials know they might be called to testify under oath, it influences behavior. The possibility of a congressional investigation makes people think twice before acting improperly. Third, oversight informs legislation. Through investigations, Congress learns what's working and what's not, which helps them craft better laws and more effective policies. The president can resist congressional oversight to some degree through executive privilege, but this privilege isn't absolute. Courts often must resolve disputes between congressional demands for information and presidential claims of privilege. Check 5. Impeachment and removal. This is the ultimate check. Congress's power to remove the president from office. The Constitution gives the House of Representatives the sole power of impeachment and gives the Senate the sole power to try impeachments. Impeachment requires a simple majority in the House. Conviction and removal require a 2/3 majority in the Senate. The Constitution specifies that presidents can be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. What does high crimes and misdemeanors mean? The founders deliberately left this somewhat vague, but historical understanding suggests it includes serious abuses of power, violations of public trust, and conduct that threatens the constitutional order. Only 3 presidents have been impeached by the House: Andrew Johnson in 1868, Bill Clinton in 1998, and Donald Trump in 2019 and again in 2021. None were convicted and removed by the Senate, though Johnson came within 1 vote of conviction. Richard Nixon likely would have been impeached and possibly convicted, but he resigned before the House voted. The Judiciary Committee had approved articles of impeachment, and it was clear he'd lost Republican support in both chambers. The impeachment power serves as a check even when it doesn't result in removal. The investigation process itself is serious. Presidents must defend their actions, political costs are significant, and the constitutional mechanism exists to remove even the most powerful official if their conduct warrants it. Here's what makes the system brilliant. These checks work together, reinforcing each other. A president who ignores Congress on legislation might face budget cuts. A president who abuses power might face investigation. A president who refuses to cooperate with oversight might face impeachment. The system also adapts to circumstances. When one party controls both Congress and the presidency, congressional checks may be weaker because of party loyalty. But even then, individual members have political incentives to assert congressional authority, especially if presidential actions threaten their constituents or their re-election. When different parties control Congress and the presidency, called divided government, congressional checks are typically stronger. The opposition party has both the motive and the means to scrutinize presidential actions more aggressively. But regardless of party control, the constitutional structure remains. Congress always has these tools available. The question is whether they choose to use them, and that often depends on political circumstances, public opinion, and individual courage. So why does this system of congressional checks on presidential power matter? Because it prevents tyranny. No single person, no matter how popular or powerful, can dominate American government if Congress exercises its constitutional authority. These checks force negotiation and compromise. Presidents must work with Congress, must persuade them, must build coalitions. This can be frustrating when you support a president's agenda, but it's essential to the system. The difficulty of getting things done is a feature, not a bug. The system also creates accountability. Congress represents the people more directly than the president does. 435 House members representing local districts, 100 senators representing states. When Congress checks presidential power, they're often representing constituent concerns about presidential overreach. Understanding these checks helps us evaluate current events more intelligently. When we see conflicts between Congress and the president, we can ask, is Congress exercising its constitutional authority? Is the president respecting constitutional limits? Are both branches negotiating in good faith within the system the founders created? The founders designed a system where ambition checks ambition. Congress has the legislative power, confirmation power, budgetary power, oversight authority, and impeachment power to check presidential authority. When Congress uses these tools, they're not obstructing, they're fulfilling their constitutional role. This balance of power has endured for over 230 years because it's built on a fundamental truth. No person should have unchecked power, and no branch should dominate the others. If you found this constitutional analysis helpful, subscribe to News Vault for more clear explanations of how American government actually works. We break down complex topics without the partisan spin. What other congressional powers should we analyze? How does the Senate filibuster work? What's the difference between authorization and appropriation? Let me know in the comments below. Check out our other videos on executive power. Thanks for watching News Vault, where we explain how government really works. I'll see you in the next one.